And I am going to go round the table to introduce our board members to begin with.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Abdul Hanaf for Headingley High Park.
Good morning, Kate Haig, Farming Wortley.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley Rawdon Ward, substituting for Councillor Shaf Ali.
Good morning, folks. It's Councillor Adrian McCluskey for Farnley and Wortley.
Luke Farley, Labour Councillor, Bermondsey and Richmond Hill.
Good morning, Councillor Annie Maloney, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Morning, Mohammed Iqbal, Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Zara Hussain, Roundhay Ward.
Morning, Lou Cunningham, Green Party, Armley Ward.
Good morning, Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
How's that biscuit going down the wrong way? Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you very much. I noted that everybody has used the intercom correctly. It's just to remind people that are visiting for the board today that because we are webcast, it is important that we sign in and sign off when we speak through the microphone. So thank you, members, for remembering that. I'll just introduce, or allow herself to introduce herself, our primary support for today's meeting.
Thank you, Chair. Becky Atherton, Principal Scrutiny Advisor.
Great. Thank you very much. Right, so we will go straight into the agenda for today. There are two meetings today, and the first agenda is a scheduled meeting that was already in the diary, and this will be followed later on at 11:30 by a call-in meeting, but that will be introduced separately, and we're going to focus on our scheduled items for today. So, item number 1.
There are no appeals against refusal of inspection documents today, Chair.
Item number 2.
There are no items excluded from the public domain. No late items, Chair.
Any declarations of interest?
Can I pause to let members make any declarations in accordance with the Code of Conduct?
Councillor Cunningham.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to declare my interest non-pecuniary as a friend of Armley and Gotts Park and also as a trustee of Armley Common Right Trust.
Councillor McCluskey.
Can I also declare that I'm a member of Friends of Wortley Rec and Friends of Western Flats Parks in Farnley and Wortley. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do we have any apologies, Becky?
Councillor Ali has sent his apologies and Councillor Thompson is substituting today, Chair.
And Councillor Thompson is very welcome. We'll move on to the minutes. Are there any matters arising from board members on the minutes? No? I will raise something small at minute 93. This refers to our previous discussion on selective licensing. It's just to let members know that the requested report is being scheduled for the first meeting of the new municipal year, so it will be heard in June. Okay, so I think we need to formally show that members accept the minutes as a correct record. If we can show. Thank you very much. And also, we've been asked to ensure that somebody proposes the minutes as a correct record. Norma Harrington, thank you. And that somebody seconds that. Councillor McCluskey, thank you very much. So I think we've covered that one. That's just for the legal team. Okay, so we're going to go into our first item of business, which is the work programme. Are there any issues to be raised on the work programme? No? Just to let members know, the schedule that we have in front of us is an amended version because there are items which were left out of this formal meeting to allow capacity for the call-in meeting to be held within the same day, and therefore other items which were scheduled in previous agenda to be received at this meeting can be accommodated in an extra meeting, which will be reported to members within the next few weeks, but will be scheduled after the Easter break. Also to note, our recycling visit has been scheduled, and we encourage members to confirm their attendance so that if there is any spare capacity, this can be offered up to councillors who have an interest in the area outside of the Scrutiny Board. Thank you very much. Councillor Haig.
I think I raised at last meeting whether or not there's a necessity to still take the radon gas reports as part of our work schedule, and I think you're going to look into that. If it's only for noting, then there's not much point in discussing it.
I did double check, Councillor Haig. The board made a commitment at the last meeting to receive an update after the first phase of testing had been carried out, because it hadn't been progressed when you last received the report. So that's been built in on that basis, but obviously if members would like to remove it from the schedule, that's entirely within the board's gift.
Anybody got a strong opinion on that one? Personally, I think if we have committed to receive a paper, we should, even if it is just to note. But I'm willing to be flexible with others. Okay. I think we'll go with the status quo then. Right, we'll move on to the next item of business, which is our substantial item, which is the Leeds Parks and Green Spaces Strategy Progress Update. At this point, I will ask council officers who are going to be presenting the report and the lead member to introduce themselves to those watching on the webcast.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start and then I'll be followed by Polly and her team. Is that okay? Okay. I'd like to begin by putting on my records to Polly and team and all the friends of groups and volunteers for all their work in maintaining a much-loved parks and green spaces. The Leeds Parks and Green Spaces strategy aims for Leeds City Council to provide the best parks and green spaces in the UK, and sets out 8 key priorities to help achieve this, and that is quality, climate and biodiversity, access for all, culture, child-friendly, working with communities, financial sustainability and health and well-being. This report provides an update on the progress which has been in delivering the vision set out in Leeds Parks and Green Spaces strategy the last 3 years. Since the last 3 years, we've actually achieved some of the following, which I'll highlight now. 70%, 77%, and that's in the report as well, of our parks achieving the Leeds Quality Park Standard. Tree planting taking place at 37 new locations across the city, 20 playgrounds refurbished across the city, significant investment in local public green space for improvements to access, play, sports facilities and nature conservation. First biodiversity net gain schemes delivered on the ground, and over 14,000 recorded volunteer hours contributed to catering for and improving public green spaces in the city. So there's a lot been going on in the last 3 years. So I'll stop there. I'm conscious of the time, and I'll pass at this stage on to Polly to maybe go into more details, or and then questions from members.
Thanks, Polly. Can you also introduce your associates?
Hi, so I'm Polly Cook. I'm the Chief Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces, and I'll just let Emma.
I'm Emma Trickett, Parks Technical Manager and author of the report.
And James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
So in terms of the only bit of additionality I just wanted to add to what Councillor Rafiq has said is just, I suppose, to focus on section 3 of the report, which are the proposed changes to the strategy. So the first two changes that are set out in the table are very minute. They are just more about wording changes, and just so rather than focusing on wildlife habitat within sort of community parks, we want to look at it in all green spaces. So that's the tweak for the first one. The second one is just moving away from talking about volunteer groups and talking about volunteers more generally. And that's because we do get a lot of individual volunteers coming in, so we think it's important to recognise that. The next three changes are slightly more significant. So we had a commitment in the plan to talk about a plan on a page for each community park. And as part of our sort of financial savings, we are looking to move away from that. However, we are still proposing that we do the access audits, and that in terms of where we look for improvements, in terms of where we decide to kind of put investment, that we use the Leeds quality park assessments and those access audits to feed into that. There was a risk with the Leeds quality parks, the plan on the page, that actually you were raising expectations where there wasn't funding available to necessarily make those changes. The second change is related to the Leeds quality park. So last year we proposed that we weren't going to assess every park every year due to resources. This year we are suggesting that actually we need to focus in on the community parks rather than the cemeteries. And that's not saying that we're not still looking at quality in cemeteries. There's other ways that we can do that. But that really, if we are limiting the number of LQP assessments that we do, that it's more important that we focus on the community parks that get the highest footfall and have the biggest impact on our communities in terms of their access to green space. The last one is around the KPI. So at this moment in time, we're just flagging that we are re-looking at our 50 hectare target for tree planting, and part of that is to do with the fact that we are looking at biodiversity. So biodiversity net gain, but just biodiversity improvements more generally. And what we're finding is that there's a competition for land over that, but also that actually sometimes biodiversity improvements can actually provide better outcomes for the environment than tree planting. So by having a target, by having a 50 hectare target that looks across all those work streams, we think that it will provide a broader benefit to the environment. But that isn't a decision that's been taken, it's something we're considering, and obviously today is an opportunity for Scrutiny to feed into all those different changes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Polly. Do we have any initial questions from the board? I will raise one, if that's all right. There were several headlines at the beginning of the report around what has been achieved from the service. However, how much of that is planned and subject to core funding, as opposed to being windfall opportunities delivered by developments happening in particular communities, and therefore that community having a sum of money available to invest in things like parks? So, for instance, you mentioned there's 20 parks have been refurbished. How many parks have you got? What proportion does that represent? And how were they identified to receive that investment? I also have a raised hand from... Yeah. I wasn't sure if that was an associated question, Councillor. Oh, a separate question. I'll get you on the list. So we'll start with that one first, if that's okay, Polly.
So I think in the report we set out, so some of that is around Section 106 and developer funding, but we also had £1 million of discretionary funding. And the way that we use that discretionary funding was around those areas that don't have access to that windfall funding or developer funding. And we focused in, so it was on health and safety, but looking to improve play areas in those areas that often don't get that funding. I'd have to find the spreadsheet to work out the exact number, but a lot of those 20 will be from that discretionary funding. We put a lot of that million into improving play areas because it was becoming a real health and safety risk for us. So, but I can send the board the list of which playgrounds were improved and where the funding came from afterwards, if that's helpful.
Thanks, Polly. Councillor Farley.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a question and I suppose a bit of a comment. I'll start with my question. 77% of community parks achieved the Leeds Quality Park Standard. What about the remaining 23% that didn't?
So some of them are borderline, and what we've used, so we've used that where they're not passing to look at where we do investments. So some of it may be, for example, quality of bins, it could be lack of signage, and that's where we focus that £1 million. And so what we'd look to do is reassess those next year and see whether we've kind of brought them up to passing. So that the idea is that we use that as a way to improve. So we've not seen an improvement in terms of from last year to this year, but we didn't have the discretionary funding, and the timing was that we've done the assessment and the discretionary funding's been spent after that. So next year you would hope to see an improvement in the number of parks that are actually coming through, because we've tried to target where we've failed. I don't know, Emma, if you want to add anything there. Okay, thanks.
My comment was on the city's tree planting programme. Now, there's a comment in here about the, and I can never pronounce this correctly, Maiawaki Forest, which is in my ward, Bermondsey and Richmond Hill, which is obviously welcomed. That was funded, I believe, through a special grant from government. Now, projects like that are obviously done kind of working with elected members. The site was chosen specifically. It was a welcome addition to the ward. Unfortunately, that can't be said for some of the other tree planting that has gone on, in particular in our parks. In Bermondsey and Richmond Hill, we're an inner city ward, and green space is at a premium. Part of the challenge that we've had is that quite often the tree planting team comes along, does a consultation, gets no responses, and then goes, oh, that's a big thumbs up for whatever we want to do. And that is not, I feel, an appropriate way to judge whether or not an area should be chosen for tree planting. And in particular, when that space itself could actually be redeveloped for sports usage or for other forms of community usage. And the way that sometimes these projects take place is, it's right in the middle of a field, which, could be used for football, or it could be used for rugby, it could be used for cricket or any other sport. And when we as elected members have said, look, please don't do this, we've effectively just been told, well, we ran our consultation and got no responses, so that means yes. And that has been a real form of frustration when it comes to kind of how we are using our parks and how we're making them spaces for everybody. I'll leave my comments there because obviously this is...
Before I bring in Councillor Cunningham, who's indicated, are there any other comments on the similar vein in terms of the tree planting policy? Oh, so that was your point? Oh, well, I'll bring you in now anyway, Councillor Cunningham, if that's all right, to talk about that, and I'll come back to you for your other point.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm really pleased actually to hear about the rethinking around the biodiversity net gain. I think for quite a number of years now, when we've had discussions about the tree planting and about the success of the tree planting, we've also raised some other issues around that, such as rewilding, planting hedgerows and wildflower meadows instead. And I'm just keen to know whether those things are actually on the projection now.
Can we hold on while I've got the other comments in? So I also had Councillor Thompson wanting to talk about the tree planting scheme.
Thank you. So we did have some similar challenges to what Councillor Farley's described, but actually we found that the relationship, I think we had one proposal that was particularly difficult because it was actually designated village green that had somehow been missed. But since then we found the consultation with us and with the community has been much more productive, and we've had walk-arounds with Vicky to look at sites, what should be in and what shouldn't, and protecting those open play spaces, which has been really constructive.
Thank you. Councillor Hannan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Polly, you'll be aware that there's some contentious issues with the meadow on Woodhouse Moor, where there was some plans for trees to be planted. I just wanted to know how you got to that stage to decide that there's going to be trees planted there, in terms of that it was a well-known meadow that's been flourishing for many, many years. I just wanted to know, because I've got a lot of people asking me how we came to that decision, in terms of why do you want to plant trees there? Thank you.
Okay, so I think first of all, just to say, I note the comments about the tree planting. We will look at how we're doing the consultation. You know, and like just heard, there were issues at Woodhouse Moor this year, so there's still further work to be done at how we improve that, and that, like you say, we don't take no responses as a positive, and I think more active engagement. So I'll note that and take that back and work through that with the team. In terms of specifically the Woodhouse Moor, it's different. Hang on, I'll move. Is that any better? Right, okay. In terms of the Woodhouse Moor issue, that only got brought to my attention about a week before the trees were due to be planted, and so at that point we did stop it, had conversations with the university. Again, I think, you know, there was a consultation that had gone on. There had been a lot of positive responses to that, so it wasn't a matter we hadn't had any responses. I think, again, it was, I think there were different views on that site. So I think that historically it had been a meadow. It currently isn't being managed as a meadow. It's gone slightly more into rewilding. But with that particular site, we have agreed that we will work with the university and their sustainability team about how we develop that for biodiversity. So although getting there wasn't necessarily our finest moment, I think we've come out with a good solution to that. And then just in terms of Councillor Cunningham's questions about sort of biodiversity, I think Emma can maybe talk a little bit about the non-mandatory work that we've done and what we've got kind of on the horizon for the mandatory biodiversity. But there will be other schemes. So, for example, Woodhouse Moor doesn't sit under either of those headings, and we're looking at how we do the meadow at Round A. We've got the specific sort of wildflower meadows. So I think we're just starting to work through that, but we're only just getting to the point of thinking, actually, we need to change. The focus at the moment has been on that mandatory or pre-mandatory BNG. But we're, you know, if there are suggestions or thoughts for any of your areas, then please put them forward. I'll just let Emma explain what we've done.
Hi, so yes, biodiversity net gain's going really well in Leeds. We're one of the first local authorities to have delivered any. We've done that through funding secured through non-mandatory net gain. So this year we've delivered the first 4 schemes, well, 2024. So Armley Park, Whitebeck Valley Road, Basket Hill, and we've done Dolphin Beck recently, and we've got 3 woodlands in Seacroft are about to be improved. So that's gone really well. We've also set up a habitat bank which will allow us to deliver mandatory net gain. But we've also done a lot of other stuff to improve biodiversity across the city. So the capital funding improved Farnley Fish Pond. There's been some pond works at Temple Newsome. There's various external funding. There's been wildflower meadows created at Round A, funded as part of the zoo scheme through butterfly conservation. So there's lots been going on, and there's lots to come.
Thank you. I'm going to pause that and bring in Councillor Haigh now to discuss something else.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got 2 points. The first is around Farnley Pond. I'd just like to thank the team and welcome the improvements that have been made there. It really has made a huge difference. And what I'm keen to understand is how we maintain that high standard going forward. So I'd like some comments on that. And also I was interested in the report to see the creation of Royal Park in Headingley. Just could you go into some detail as to how that was achieved, please, and what prospects there are in other places that perhaps could use similar facilities?
I think Royal Park was funded through Section 106. Yeah. So So I guess that was a lucky external funding, and I guess the details of it in the document. So we do have a new park in development in the city centre, Air Park, and there's Green Park in North East Leeds, which is also in development. So they do come through, usually through the planning system, but it's not a particularly frequent thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Section 106, etc., is useful for the initial spend, but I presume that with maintenance going forward, there is an impact on the budgets as well. So, what is the impact of that on? How would you get that built in?
So normally with any Section 106 scheme, we build in a revenue amount for a number of years, so normally 10 years, which is anticipated to be the lifespan of the playground. So that has to be built in for it to be financially viable going forward. And then just in terms of the Farnley fish pond question, so when I'd come into post, there was quite a lot of criticism about Farnley fish pond and the fact that we couldn't maintain it. And part of that was because basically we needed to invest quite a large sum of money in order to dredge it, because it was unsafe for staff to be able to go out. So now that actually that's been done, we can actually keep on top, whereas we'd got to a point we just couldn't do anything with it. So that's why we've made that kind of capital investment and done the other works around it. So actually it should be able to be maintained within our normal workforce.
Councillor Farley.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just sort of partly leading on from that and just considering the plans on pages. Now, in BRH, we've had 2 plans on pages, one for Knoll Park and one for East End Park. Now, reading through the report, page 24, there is a note 2.10 with regards to 2024 plans agreed for Blenheim Square and Banstead Park. Informed how external funding was allocated at the sites, and same as planned for Winmore Park. What about those parks, such as East End Park, where the chance of kind of getting external funding at this, you never know, you might win the lottery or something, but at this point are fairly limited, and obviously quite a lot of work has gone into developing these plans, looking at how we can make these nicer spaces. Now obviously there's relatively cheap things we can do to improve the parks, but that sort of bringing up to scratch and sort of making it a really great community space that kind of people not just from the local area but from, dare I say it, further afield want to come down and enjoy that space, because East End Park is a really lovely space. But what if any plans do we have, or what funding might be available that isn't just sort of windfall grants?
Really, that's when the sort of things like heritage lottery funding or things like the Levelling Up Fund, if anything like that becomes available again, which is what we've obviously used. So it is really those bigger funds. What we do, so just recently we've been approached with some funding that we've got discretion where we spend, which is for a very specific purpose. And so when we get approached with things like that, we think of places like East End Park, where we know that they don't have other funding, but it is, a couple of additional bits of play kit. It's not refurbishing the whole park. So we are always aware, and like if we bid for funding with places like from Viola or things like that, we would never bid for that for parks that have Section 106. We'd always try and target all those other funds towards the parks where we know that they haven't got that benefit. And the same with the discretionary funding, we would target, but you're never going to get sort of a transformational project. It's always going to be sort of, additional bins and additional couple of bits of kit, and just keep trying to kind of chip away at it. But that is all that we've got kind of within our reach at the minute, but we constantly look out if there's any other funding coming.
Councillor Cunningham, did you want to bring in your separate subject matter now?
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so it's probably linked points just around volunteer input, but also to do with some of the maybe language and terminology around that in the report and in some of the documents, raising some questions around some of the impacts. So I still always feel that the volunteer input is never properly highlighted in terms of how much it's valued and just how much some of the Friends of groups actually do a lot of the basic maintaining of parks and green spaces. So not just in terms of maybe some of the gardening and the flower beds, but also in terms of maintaining some of the community and cultural bonds with the community. I can speak on behalf of Friends of Armley and Gotts Park in that we arrange a number of community events throughout the year which draw hundreds of people to Armley Park, including the dog show, the lantern parade and other aspects which create really accessible events for people in the community. And also we have a really active park run group that again draw hundreds of people each week to the park. And I feel that those ventures really underpin a lot of what the council are trying to achieve with their looking at attaining quality and value for our green spaces. So I think one is how are we really recognising that volunteer input and recognising how much of a mainstay the volunteers are for those spaces, but also thinking about the kind of development side of things. I picked up on the words about raising expectations with the plan on the page. And I think part of me feels that if we are looking at, we don't have to raise expectations. All we have to do is read the leaders' comments around what the hopes are for Leeds and the park spaces. The expectations are set out. So why shouldn't the community share in those expectations? And I think we rely a lot on the volunteers and on the community to pull together in terms of whether it's fundraising, whether it's putting time in to arrange events. So why shouldn't the community have those aspirations and share those aspirations and work towards them as well? And also just to draw upon the fact that in the past few years, a lot of work has been done by community groups in terms of mapping out expectations and mapping out ideas. So I refer back to the work that was done with the Levelling Up bid 2 or 3 years ago, where we looked at whole schemes supporting and connecting the parks and green spaces in the whole of West Leeds. And I think it would be a shame if that work is kind of left behind, because that work did involve drawing upon different community groups, taking those opinions into account and looking at forward planning. Thank you.
Sorry.
I was going to bring in an extra element, Polly, which I thought might help. So I'm going to go down to plans on a page. Now, those were discussed at length with Scrutiny in terms of the value of them to make our parks more inclusive in terms of the community being able to have a say on what they like about a park, what they feel isn't working well in a park, what they might want to achieve in the longer term, auditing whether it's inclusive and accessible to all the members of the community that they're meant to be serving as community parks. And I think for me as a chair of the Scrutiny Board, we all felt that we were on the same page, that was the direction we should all be going in terms of making sure that parks are for everybody and that investment is achieved where we can, and that the plan on a page means that when we did get some windfall money, there was a scheme that it could be allocated to, or even, for instance, you could have local fundraising efforts if there's something which couldn't be delivered from council funds themselves. So it was disappointing to see that this wasn't going to go forward. And I think it's because there's a member of staff which has left the organisation and it was their job to do them. And I think there's a concern that in settings like this, where we're sharing with you the concerns of the local population and the aspirations of the population as public representatives, and we think we've got a deal, that actually that deal can be broken quite quickly, basically because there's no business continuity in parks as an organisation. So can we have some reassurance going forward that what is discussed at this forum actually has a long-standing impact, and for instance, when we're looking at things like we're having a call-in soon, aren't we, around bowling, that the time which is taken by members who are elected and their communities to come up with solutions can be responded to in the long term, or is Parks actually getting to the point where the capacity within it isn't able to sustain the ambitions of the city? Sorry, that was a very long and very complicated question, but it feels like a lot of the issues that we've been discussing today, behind it is a much bigger issue, which is Parks isn't able to respond in the way that it used to, and we should find a new way to go forward. And one of the things I think would be quite useful, because we've had a community committee review, haven't we, where we're looking at things where the community and the community committees can get involved in delivering more for the council by involving the community. This looks like a really key area where improvements could be made through that engagement, and the discussion around volunteers is one aspect of it. There might be more about how, and Councillor Farley has mentioned the bit about you want to plant some trees, but do you really want to plant some trees in something that you've already developed as a lovely wildflower meadow? And that issue might have been avoided in Woodhouse Moor if Woodhouse Moor had its plan on a page, because it's not on the list of parks that has got a plan on a page. So it feels like there's lots of things that are becoming problems because there hasn't been the engagement at the very beginning of the process. So how do we overcome that going forward, Polly?
So I think plan on a page is one way, but I think if you look at what's been delivered over the last year with limited funding, you can see that parks are still improving. So I don't think we're standing still regardless of the financial situation. So there is improvement. There are things that are being responded to. We've already heard about Farnley Pond. We've had 20 playgrounds, which are all things that are being fed through. I think what we're trying to do, we are having to target resource, the same as every council across the country. And so actually to target resource when you've got funding available feels a more effective and efficient way of doing it, and making sure we do the best with what we've got, which is what we've done. I don't think, so things like the accessibility audits are still going to be happening, so there's still opportunities for people to feed in. When we are doing the tree planting, so although we've heard some areas where that's not worked as effectively, the team are doing multiple sites across the whole city. There are others where it has worked effectively. So, and I think with the playgrounds and things like that, there is consultation that goes on, and there's examples where there's been real changes based on that coming back in. So I don't think the plan on the page is the only aspect of what we're doing in terms of setting it out. And I think in terms of the volunteers, we still work really strongly through the Leeds Park Forum. We always have senior representation there, and our own ranger group engage on the ground. But, you know, I'm more than happy to meet with Councillor Cunningham and sort of listen more carefully in terms of what you think we're not doing and what we could do differently, because there's always opportunities, and we are looking at our own ranger resource and how we can develop that more effectively. And that could be one of the ways that we make sure we're supporting volunteers and getting the most out of them.
Councillor Thompson. I beg your pardon. Councillor Rafiq.
I did put my hand up, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, there's a few points I want to raise. First of all, trees. We've set out an ambitious programme to plant over 200,000 trees every year. It does become challenging every year, and we do write to members. I know we've written to all the members at the beginning of March, because I got an email as a ward member, asking if you got any sites where we can plant trees. So, you know, as well as obviously doing the consultation, there's so much we could do. And, you know, I'll take people's, colleagues' points where if no comments are made from committee members, we shouldn't necessarily take as a kind of a green light to go ahead. But we do actually take member views because the members, we all know our wards really well, like the back of our hands. We know what our residents think, and I can think of over the years a number of sites across the city where members and residents have come back and say, well, actually this is a no-go area, and we said, well, that's fine. We've not done anything without the members' wishes. So, but it is very much about going forward. It's a partnership work, and sometime if you're not, then we are stuck because tree planting the benefits of it is important. I think, we're always looking to help. Again, I can think of my ward where we're trying to set up work with, volunteer friends of groups to set them up. And they are, Councillor Cunningham's right. I think the volunteers or friends of groups, the work they do, whether it's through litter picking or just, getting together, some of the other work they do, keeping the parks, we would struggle. And that's always been there, I think, probably more so now than before. I think we have, if you look at, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, to what we're working towards in terms of funding, the funding envelope has got smaller in terms of reliance on general fund. We're having to generate money as a service to put back in to and maintain, and sadly what's happened over the last 14-15 years, that is the case. We know the councils, not just Leeds City Council but across the country, the finances, so that is a challenge. But I can also say that despite some of those financial challenges, we've managed to secure some funding the last year from our capital programme to put into parks. So I think, your Chair, with due respect, your comment that we're actually, unlike before, the parks are falling behind, I actually completely disagree with that. I think there's always more to be done, and hence, the scrutinies and members' input is important, like any other area of the council. But and there are always, I take Councillor Hanan's point of view, but sometimes things don't always go to plan. But we always, we always work with ward members, and when things don't go right, to put it straight as well. I could go on, but I'll stop there. I'm conscious of the time, Chair.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things we've experienced is where we have conflicting ideas about the use of the park. So where there are anglers with the pond and others using other parts of the park and contributing in different ways. And in cases like that, it feels like a community plan on a page or multiple pages with a little bit of support to enable that could be a really powerful thing to bring people together and to try and deal with some of the conflict before it gets worse, or prevent it in the first place, ideally. So much as perhaps it's not feasible to go with them as they are, is there another way that uses those community resources, the volunteers, the local expertise, the sports clubs, the newly retired people who like a project and would have a lot to contribute? Is there perhaps another more engaging way that we could do those that would support the parks and make people feel like they're really part of the plan. Thank you.
I think I know the specific example you're referencing. So I think where there are things like that, where there is kind of conflict, or I think there might be ways to do something different. And so we were talking, actually, I've made a note about that because it's one thing I need to come back on. So I think we do need to look at different ways of doing it, but I think it's rather than being formulaic and kind of having a commitment that we're going to do it, let's do it where there's a real need and that it kind of helps us to move a space on, as opposed to having a commitment to just kind of do one for every single park. Let's do it on a kind of needs basis.
Councillor McCluskey.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I reiterate Councillor Haig's statement about Farnley Pond? It's absolutely wonderful to get the investment into our area, and it is really appreciated by the local community. Just a couple of points. The 20 refurbished playgrounds, is there a list going forward of who's going to be done, a works programme, and how do members access that to know if there's anything been affected in their area?
I can share that. I haven't got it with me now, but I can share a future works programme.
Fabulous. And just again, then at the plan on a page, we got ours in December, and it's really useful. I mean, we know we're not going to achieve this until there's money, but it really does give a forward-thinking plan for people to look at, and I really, really appreciate them being done. So, I mean, I know you're saying it's one tool of many, but I just would like to say it's been a really, really useful tool.
Thank you. Councillor Hannan.
Just to comment on what you said, Chair, in terms of parks not being improved, but I have to say Royal Park Gardens has made a massive improvement in our community in terms of the facility the council has created, because if you're aware, it's got 4 elements in the park. It starts from a children's playground to a purpose-built mugger with basketball courts and football pitch. Also, in addition to that, there's a mini gym, outdoor gym that is widely used, and also there's also a garden. So I must, appreciate officers and the lead member in ensuring that does meet the community needs, because that's what the community asked for. And if you do ever pass by, you'll see lots and lots of people using it, and I do really appreciate that actually happened. But that is a good model to go forward in terms of if you are developing future parks. Bring different elements into it so that majority of the community can use it throughout the day and throughout the year. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with Councillor Hannan with regards to Royal Park, Community Park. I've had comments from people in your ward and really saying it's done an excellent job, but I mean that is actually through Section 106 funding. Not all wards have that, unfortunately, but I'm proud to say that as a service and working us as a team, we managed to get some money off through our capital program. There's some challenging circumstances and made some improvements, and that's the biggest injection we've had through for a long time, because historically most of the funding that goes into parks or new is through Section 106. That is, which is controlled by ward members to an extent. Without the ward members, that money isn't spent. So I think there's a lot to be proud of what we've done over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and hopefully we've got some more plans to make some further improvements going forward.
Can I bring up another area? You've mentioned the biodiversity net gain. Now, one person's biodiversity net gain could be somebody else's bramble patch. So in terms of how we're developing these areas, how are we involving local communities into understanding exactly what it is that biodiversity net gain is that they're going to be gaining? Because one of the issues that we've discovered in Rothwell Ward is that there is a lot of focus on community parks, and Rothwell Park has been maintained really well, and the council has got a new relationship with volunteers who've been allowed in to make improvements, and it's worked really, really well. But we have other parks which are more naturalistic, and effectively they don't have any resource whatsoever allocated to them in terms of their maintenance. So they are effectively rewilded, as Councillor Cunningham mentioned. However, to be a park, an environment needs to have accessibility. So how do we encourage the council to have a schedule of maintenance of things like paths so that actual people can participate in the environment as well as the biodiversity that we're attracting to it? Because if there's no accessibility for people, then it's not a park. And it feels like the rush towards biodiversity net gain and to tree planting generally is because it requires less human resource to maintain it. But human resource maintenance is necessary to allow people to access and enjoy that natural environment which is being created, so that it's not just for the birds and the bunnies. So how do we overcome that?
I'm going to let Emma answer the bulk of it. She's been doing all the detailed work. But just to say, there's one thing about biodiversity net gain is that there is no rush. It's quite a slow process because it comes through development. It's agreed during the planning process, and so it leads in. There's a plan developed, and then there's a maintenance plan for 30 years. So I think, you know, some of the things we've heard about tree planting, the system is set up very, very differently from biodiversity net gain. So I just wanted to set people's minds at rest with that, but I'll let Emma talk through.
Hi, so there's another good thing about biodiversity net gain is it funds maintenance for 30 years. So you have to deliver the improvement to habitat, and you have to maintain it, and you have to prove that you've done that over 30 years. So maintenance isn't too much of a problem for 30 years. Also, there's some planning guidance around biodiversity net gain, and they're keen that it delivers the best it can for biodiversity in the city. So it's actually focused on nature areas. So it's not going to be making a massive difference to sites like the tree planting has been. We're not generally going to be changing a mown grass area and creating scrubland. Generally, we're going to be improving habitat that already exists. So, for example, woodland, maintaining grassland better. So we've done Ascot Hill this year, which is a wildflower meadow that's been there as long as records have existed, but we've not been maintaining it very well due to lack of resources. So actually, the impact for the public shouldn't be too significant, but it will just be better for wildlife. So hopefully we'll see more butterflies and things like that. And we do consult. So before we do the work, we speak to ward members, friends of groups. Like I say, the impact isn't massive, so you don't really need to do a massive consultation. And yeah, I think that answers your question.
And, sorry, the emphasis was on how do we enable people to access it? So maintenance of footpaths and things.
Yeah, sorry, I did mean to mention that. Biodiversity net gain can fund maintenance of footpaths, because if you maintain them properly, people tend not to go around the edges to get around muddy areas. So actually it is going to fund that, and it will fund the maintenance of them. So we can, you know, keep the habitat in good condition, but also provide access for the public.
Very good. Any further questions from members? Can I ask a last one? You've mentioned bins and how new bins have been introduced into parks, which is always very welcome. I know that as councillors we've invested what little money we have in bins. However, when we do get asked to put bins into parks, we are often discouraged by park staff who basically say, could you not place it on a footpath near to the park as opposed to inside the park, because that means that it becomes the responsibility of the highway section, who collect bins more effectively than we do as a park section, because it's not a core activity for us. And elected members have noted, I know I do, that in my area where there are bins that are parks' responsibility, they can tend to end up overflowing and need to be reported proactively rather than being regularly emptied. Is there any strategy for making that better? Because it isn't mentioned in the report here. It just talks about educating school children.
So that issue has never been raised with me before. So if that is something that's happening, if you can flag it with me, I'll have a look at it and see, because nobody should be saying that. Each park, in terms of bin emptying, will be different depending on demand. So some bins during the summer periods, we do hotspot littering over the weekend because we know that they overflow, or parks that gets a lot of picnics and things like that. So I think I'd need to sort of look at specific instances because it's not an issue that's ever been raised. So I haven't got kind of an answer at my fingertips.
There is a big issue with litter on Woodhouse Moor, Polly. We have I think she's about 76-year-old volunteer that goes out every day picking up litter. I think we need to look at probably a bit more signage and probably look at the size of the bins. Unfortunately, I've got nothing against students, but it's the students that are going out because that is their back garden, and they go to the bins and they're overflowing and they just leave everything round the sides. I think there needs to be some communication probably with the university in terms of, your litter is your responsibility. You brought it to the park, then you should take it back home. I'm sure there's clear messages out there, but I think Woodhouse Moor is quite unique, as you're aware, and it does then become a bit of an eyesore in terms of, is it a park or is it a dumping ground? Thank you.
Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a point on the bins, Polly. In Wetherby, for example, Wetherby Town Council empty some bins. The Parks Department on the Ings empty 2 bins. The Sports Association, which are leisure services, they empty another bin, and Highways empty a different bin. So there are sometimes in 3 different areas in Wetherby, there are 3 different organisations to do with Leeds City Council going round to empty the bins, but they will only empty their own bin. So they would drive past an overflowing bin that belongs to Highways, but they pick up the one that belongs to Parks. So we really need to try and have some kind of roundtable discussion about how we could get the different departments to work collectively together, because it seems a bit inefficient to have 3 different lots of people going around in the same areas trying to collect different bins. So if we could have a joined up process, that might be a cost-effective way of working. Thank you.
James Rogers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a topic that does come up quite often, as you might imagine, because different organisations and different services have different ways of working and different responsibilities. And that does come into play in terms of litter bins as well. We're always keen to explore wherever there are efficiencies to be gained by looking at potentially joining up activity with, for example, the cleaner neighbourhoods teams, emptying, for example, more bins than they would otherwise do. But what we do is, on each case, we'll look at the sort of spoke arrangements in place and see whether it actually is more efficient or not. Because in some cases, it can actually be inefficient to actually do that for a variety of reasons. in terms of the wider responsibilities particular teams have, or the geographies involved and the amount of travelling involved. So in Wetherby, for example, I know quite a bit of work's been done around the wilderness area where all those bins are emptied now by CNT, because we've had those discussions with local ward members. So what I would encourage ward members to do, where they've got suggestions of that nature, speak directly to your local Cleaner Neighbours team officers in the first instance and explore the possibilities of doing something more joined up and more efficient.
Okay, that sounds like a way forward. Did you want to come back in, Councillor Hannon?
I welcome the improvements on Banstead Park, something that I've got a very strong connection with. In 1982, I was fortunate enough to name that park with the school that I attended. It was Hales Middle School. Out of 900 children, my name came out of the hat first to name the park. So I have the pleasure of saying that I actually named Banstead Park.
Well, on that note, on that note, I think generally all councillors would like to think that they have some kind of legacy to leave in their local park. So that's why it's always very good to be able to work alongside and with council officers so that we get mutual beneficial outcomes for the parks that we're responsible for. So thank you for your attendance today. We're going to close this meeting now and reconvene. Oh, I beg your pardon, we've got another item, haven't we? We have another item which generally is for noting. Right, sorry, so item 9, we have end of year statement of Scrutiny this year, which I know you will have all digested, and if you have any comments on what is proposed in the wording, please let me know now. Okay. Hopefully it gives a brief summary of all the varied work that we've concluded this year, and also sets out parameters for what we hope to get our teeth into next year in environment, housing, communities. And I thank you all for your diligence and investment of your time in looking at those issues during that year. Right, so we've got the date and time of next meeting, which is 11:30 today. So please take advantage of the now 27 minutes for you to have a rest or perhaps something to eat if you haven't done so already. Thank you very much.